Welcome to the Aerospace Ambition Podcast. I'm your host, Marius, an engineer passionate about sustainable aviation and AI. In today's episode, we're going to explore the subject of contrail management through the lens of an air navigation service provider, abbreviated as ANSP. We'll specifically focus on the contrail initiatives undertaken by the National Air Traffic Services, or NATS. Our guest today is Sian Andrews, the SESAR Environmental Lead at NATS. Since joining NATS in 2005 as a trainee air traffic controller and moving on to live training in area control, Sian has been an integral part of the SESAR team within the Airspace and Future Operations department at NATS. She concentrates on research that aims to yield environmental benefits and serves as the lead for NATS on contrails. In the SESAR 3 CICONIA project, she heads the validation work package, focusing on contrail mitigation, and also contributes to the SESAR 3 Green Gear project, which deals with environmental route charging. Sian, welcome on the show.
Thank you very much, Marius. It's great to be here.
It's great to have you. And to set the stage, I'd like to first say that we're trying everything to spell out the acronyms in the beginning. And maybe let's do so by speaking about NATS.
Sure. So NATS is the UK's leading provider of air traffic services, and our function as an ANSP is to provide a safe, orderly and expeditious flow of air traffic. We have responsibility in NATS for the London and the Scottish flight information regions, and also the Shamwick Oceanic area. So that's pretty much the eastern half of the North Atlantic area. In addition to this, we provide air traffic services for 15 UK airports. Hopefully that gives a bit of a picture of what NATS is.
It does, and also we can now put you on the map. That makes it very interesting. Also in the context of contrail management, that region certainly has a role to play. But before we dive deeper into that, maybe just on a high level, it's the first time that we have someone from the ANSP perspective here, or air traffic management, ATM. What is meant by air traffic management?
So basically, air traffic management means that we control the skies and we make sure that everybody is safely separated. So our primary function is to ensure the safety of the traffic in the skies. In addition to this, as I said, we try and provide a kind of orderly and expeditious flow of air traffic. That means we want to provide the most efficient trajectories that we can for our customers, the airlines and the flying public. So we have a number of controllers and assistants and their support teams and engineers as a whole big organization behind it all. And what we do is we will manage your flight. So, for example, a flight from taking off from Heathrow, we will be managing the flight on the ground at Heathrow, through to the takeoff, through the climb, the cruise, and as it goes out, if it's a transatlantic flight, over the North Atlantic until we hand off over to Gander. Same with inbound flights. Again, we'll manage the flights in the en route airspace, down through our TMAs, which are the terminal maneuvering areas, through to the approach at the airports where we have that function, and down to the airport again. So it's quite a broad remit. We have a couple of control centres. So we have on the south coast the Swanwick Area Control Centre, or Area and Terminal Control Centre, and in Scotland we have our Prestwick Centre, which does Prestwick and Manchester airspace and also the Shamwick Oceanic area.
And the highest priority, as far as I understand, is safety. Of course, providing safety in an efficient manner, but it's all about safety.
Yeah.
For me, this raises the question, how can you guarantee safety given the massive growth in aviation that is projected by 2050 and beyond? So from an ATM perspective, what do you think will be the limiting factor for growth?
So that's a really good question. And I think we've been dealing with growth for many decades now. And probably people who used to control things back in the 80s and 90s would not believe the amount of traffic that we deal with at the moment. And we've always made sure, as we say, the priority is safety. Growth isn't allowed unless it's safe growth. So that's a really critical point. And yeah, it is a complete challenge as we go forwards. we have better surveillance systems in place. We have better tools to manage that growth. So, for instance, when I trained as an air traffic controller, we were using paper flight progress strips, and soon after that, this is developed, and we use various systems so that we're entering our clearances that we pass to the aircraft into the systems. There's lots of safety nets. So this sort of thing is continually being developed and improved, and we've got whole big programs about improving our infrastructure so that we can manage that growth in air traffic safely and also as efficiently as possible. So, as I said, safety is a completely non-negotiable. Everything has to be safe, and in fact, we're always looking to improve safety. And what we also want to do is, alongside that safety, be as efficient as possible. So we want to do whatever we can to reduce the environmental impact of flights, and in air traffic, we can provide that operational efficiency through a good operation. So we kind of seek to do this through, at the moment, we're working on our airspace modernization programs. Now, that's something that's been going on for a long time and will continue to. It will forever be evolving. So one of the most relatively recent big upgrades to our airspace was actually what we call West deployment. And this was a big change implemented about a year ago over the southwest of England and Wales. And it introduced free route airspace above flight level 245. So this means that aircraft can file from point to point without being constrained by the air traffic route system. And below that, we've introduced systemized airspace. So using new technology such as PBN, which is performance-based navigation routes, which can be much more precise and flying basically where the airlines generally need to go. So we're working on really managing the efficiency as well. But it's increasingly challenging to do this with more aircraft in the sky, of course.
I'm wondering, is the limiting factor for growth, do you think, rather the staff or the personnel, the air traffic controllers, or is it just the physical capacity of airports? Because we do have these, vortices in the air that basically make takeoff or landing impossible for a certain number of seconds. So that is a physical constraint. And then you have the people constraint. Do you see one overwhelming the other?
I think they're both points that we have to consider. So at the moment, we do kind of say we're quite restricted in growth by the actual tarmac available, but we look to maximize this as much as possible. So what we mean by that is the actual runways that we have available to use. Now, there is a lot of work being done for improving runway optimization. So one of the previous SESAR projects that I was working on was actually a demonstration project where we looked to demonstrate pairwise separation, which is an evolution of time-based separation. And through this work, which we intend to implement later on this year at Heathrow, we've actually been able to show that we can improve the runway throughput by, as you say, we have to be careful of the vortices that are produced by aircraft, and there's only a safe amount of separation between certain aircraft types. But whereas that was being managed in a very general way, so just 6 categories of aircraft, we've now managed to use a pairwise function, which means we've got a 103 by 103 matrix of different aircraft types, which give different, more precise separations between the aircraft. And between this and the time-based separation that's already been implemented, it means that in time-based separation means in conditions of strong headwinds, we can actually maintain or close to maintain the runway throughput, whereas otherwise, using distance-based separation, the distances get longer when you have a strong headwind coming into the runway. So in that way, we're looking to really optimize the throughput. That can, on the one hand, increase the potential for capacity. And on the other hand, if you don't then increase the capacity at the airport, it can enable more efficiency. So it can mean that we don't have to have aircraft holding as long, for example, and thereby we can save fuel for the airlines by implementing this. So that's one area. We're always looking to optimize runway throughput, but we also have to consider our airspace and, as you say, the staffing of the airspace, but actually the airspace limitations itself. historically, a lot of the time when we would be approaching an overload situation, which I can talk about how we avoid that as well. But in those situations, it's actually the RT loading. So that means the radio communications. You can have kind of constant radio communications, which is very difficult to keep on top of. The controllers are brilliant at managing it. So usually when a pilot comes on into a particular sector, they will call that controller. And in cases where it's very busy, the controller will know to expect them. They have all the information and they can call with the instruction that's needed. But it can be very challenging when the radio frequency is at its capacity. So that's one of the considerations we have to have. We're introducing more and more over the years CPDLC, which is controller pilot data link communications. So this means that some of the standard clearances, like moving on to another frequency, can be used in a way other than radio, so it helps to free that up. We also look at how we manage our sectors. So in terms of the staffing being the limitation and actually how much a particular controller can manage. So we work in controller teams with a tactical and a planning controller usually. And how this works is that they have a certain amount of airspace that they are basically in charge of, and they will manage all the interactions within that airspace. Now we have different sectorizations, and we can be flexible with those sectorizations throughout the day. So we can have, say, a group of, for example, 3 sectors which are put together, and one controller team will manage that group of 3 sectors when it's not so busy. And then as the traffic becomes busier, those sectors can then be split down into 2 or 3 different sections. So again, this is part of our airspace modernization. We'll be looking at how we sectorize as well. And over the years, that's evolved and sectors have changed. So that's part of how we make sure that the staff we have can manage more traffic effectively. Now, I did mention, what we want to avoid is an overload, because that, of course, would have safety implications if a controller was overloaded. So we make sure that this doesn't happen in the first place, partly through managing the network. So air traffic flow and capacity management, which network manager at Eurocontrol supports. And this is when all of the flight plans for aircraft coming through the airspace are put into the system, and then we can tell if there's going to be any particular hotspot through any sectors which may be too busy for the controllers to safely handle. Now, in those circumstances, then we have the options to either route around those sectors or to put a departure regulation on. So when the aircraft is given a slot allocation, and this ensures that basically the traffic is kind of smoothed out, so it won't all be arriving at one time, and it ensures the safety.
So there are definitely a lot of initiatives going on that make air traffic management more efficient and also more reliable. And one of these initiatives or projects is CICONIA. And CICONIA is a project within the umbrella of SESAR. And since this is the first time we speak about this on podcast, what is SESAR? What does it stand for? It's an acronym. Why is it useful for aviation?
Okay, so SESAR is the Single European Skies ATM research program, ATM being air traffic management. So it's a very large European program that's been running for a number of years, so since I think 2009, in various guises. And it's all about bringing research and innovation forwards across Europe and working collaboratively. So we have been involved, NATS has been involved in SESAR from the beginning, and we've completed a number of projects. In the current program, we are involved in around about 20 projects, ranging through from exploratory research to industrial research and demonstration projects. So there's various levels of maturity that we're looking at, and we kind of have a innovation pipeline, as we call it, to bring things through and ultimately out into the operation. So there's a number of things that are operational now that have come through the SESAR pipeline. So, for example, I mentioned TBS earlier, so time-based separation, which is an optimizer for runway usage, and we've put that into the operation It's been in operation at Heathrow since 2015. We did some further work in SESAR and then introduced enhanced TBS from 2018. And then we further developed that, as I said, for the pairwise separation, which we plan to implement at Heathrow later this year, and then also next year at Gatwick in mixed mode operation for the single runway there. SESAR itself covers so much more than that. I suppose it probably makes sense if I talk about some of the projects I've been involved in SESAR. So at the moment, my main focus is on the CICONIA project on non-CO2. And as you mentioned, I also work on an environmental recharging project. I'll talk a little bit more about those in a moment. But in our previous SESAR program, there was a lot of work that took place there that ended last summer. And I was working on the pairwise project that I've talked about. But also I was leading on a project where we were developing more efficiency for arriving aircraft through arrival streaming management. So a new concept, it still needs quite a bit more work, but building on things that we have in place at the moment. So in our current operation, we have cross-border arrival management. And this is a system where when we're predicting that there will be a reasonable amount of holding at the airport. Now, low-level stack holding is really quite inefficient in terms of fuel usage, so we want to avoid this wherever it's possible. And through our cross-border arrival management, basically our neighbouring ANSPs will work to slow down aircraft in the cruise phase, so they're basically absorbing some of that delay in the cruise phase rather than the low-level holding. So at the moment, they will slow down aircraft up to Mach 0.04. And that takes out some of the delay and it saves some fuel. So it's a really good initiative to be doing. And we've got this in place for both Heathrow and Gatwick. What we've been looking at in the SESAR project is how to improve on that further. So actually, rather than just having blanket slowdown of all aircraft, we're looking to stream the aircraft so that when they reach their top of descent point, they will actually be nicely spaced and can have a more efficient continuous descent on systemized airspace, as well as using some of that delay absorption and managing to absorb more of that delay actually than we do currently. So we have thresholds where we say we'll only implement the cross-border arrival management slowdowns if delay is predicted to be over 7 minutes, for example, whereas we can bring that number down and still keep the flow of traffic coming onto the runway through those stacks and onto the runway. So that's still work in progress at the moment, but it's some really interesting work. One of the real benefits about SESAR is it's not all about working on your own, but working with other partners as well. So that particular project had quite a few partners developing some of their own initiatives around this area. And we were supportive of some of the work that Eurocontrol were doing, looking at reducing those extra track miles that are flown in the final phases of flight, and instead taking delay on the ground rather than stack holding. So Eurocontrol did some really good theoretical work. They've produced a couple of papers on this. They've made a dashboard available for up to 30 airports in the European area. And a lot of their work's actually really relevant to Heathrow. So we're now taking that forward in this current SESAR program under a project called Island that some of my colleagues are working on. This is looking at, within the project, we want to run live trials of demand and capacity balancing at Heathrow. So this is where we're saying when we're predicting that there will be excess holding and quite significant delay there, we want to take that delay out of the air and onto the ground to a certain degree. We can't do that completely, but we'll take some of that holding out of the air and onto the ground. And we're also going to expand on the concept by taking some of the holding for the long haul aircraft as well, by giving them target times of arrival. So when you're looking at the ground delay, obviously that's just aircraft departing from within Europe, but we also want to include arrivals from the Far East, from the US potentially, so that we can slow those down. When you slow them down further out, you have potential to absorb more delay. And again, that's saving aircraft flying around in those fuel inefficient holding stacks. So there's real potential for a lot of environmental savings by doing that. So we're looking to trial that initially. And one of the benefits of this is that it's actually looking at something we can do using procedures we have already. So it's not really needing any new equipment. It's not really needing anything drastically new or waiting for new technology. It's just kind of changing our procedures slightly. And when I say slightly, we can leverage how much we actually want to change that. So at the moment, we will implement delay if, say, the holding is predicted to be greater than 20 minutes. We might consider putting regulations on. And with this concept, we can bring that number down. So it could potentially go down to something like 6 minutes based on the Eurocontrol theoretical work that shows that this is actually the optimum. But it might be easier to bring it down more slowly in the live operation so that we can understand the effects better, because live is often a little bit more difficult than theoretical. But we'll see where we go. So it's really exciting work. There's a lot of potential that we can have there. So those are some examples of the work that we do within SESAR. SESAR as a whole is, like I said, it's a real collaboration. We have airlines, we have ANSPs, we have Eurocontrol involved, we have industry partners, we have academia, and we all kind of come together and work on projects.
Certainly very exciting projects there. Another approach that's very interesting is the CICONIA project that you've alluded to earlier. Let's dive deeper into that kind of project. What does it stand for? What is its goal?
Okay, what it stands for. So CICONIA is actually the name of a bird, because Airbus lead the project and they like to name all their projects after birds. So it's a bit of a backronym which they've made work. It stands for Climate Effects Reduction through Innovative Concept of Operations Needs and Impact Assessment. There we go, passed that test. But basically, what we're looking at in the project is kind of twofold, really. We're looking on one hand to improve the science behind contrails. And this is through work packages looking at the MET forecasting. So how can we improve the MET forecasting? And looking at the climate impact assessment, how can we improve that? So those work packages being led by Météo France and DLR, the German Aerospace Centre, respectively. And NATS are kind of interested in that work and following it, but we're not so actively engaged there. And the other side of what the project is doing is where NATS are more directly engaged. And this is developing a concept of operations for contrail mitigation and showing the operational feasibility and running validation exercises to show what we can do now. So as a project, we are quite ambitious, I think. We've got a lot of exercises planned over the 3 years of the project. So we started last summer in June and we're running until the middle of 2026. And we've currently got about 15 exercises planned. So these include eventually live trials. We've already started on some of the exercises. So our airline partners are running some shadow mode exercises or kind of desktop exercises, which they've started already. And we've got a lot of simulations from other partners running to support all this as well. So I think it's a really good mix of what we can show and demonstrate. And what we're looking to do is actually show what's possible at the moment and what will be possible in the future. So we've been, first of all, developing the concept, and we're saying, well, what can we actually do here? And we've split into what we're calling three sub-solutions that we want to take forward conceptually. Two of these are airline-led options, and the third one is an ANSP-led mitigation action. So in terms of airline-led, we have airline-led short-haul operations. And in this solution, what we're looking at is the airlines actually in their flight planning phase, looking at the best way to mitigate against contrails with the forecasts that they're given and the climate understanding, putting that into their flight plan. And then the ANSP will basically endeavour to fly the flight as filed and ensure that the airline can do that. So we would be notified as air traffic control in the flight information that it is a contrail avoidance flight, potentially through certain areas. So between waypoint A and waypoint B, it's applying contrail avoidance, and therefore it needs this particular flight level. And we would endeavour to facilitate that as much as, of course, safety permits. So that's the first sub-solution we're looking at. The second sub-solution is for long-haul flights, and this includes our transatlantic flights as well as intercontinental flights. And we'd start off in the same way with the airline, again, being airline led, and the airline filing a flight plan, taking into consideration the climate optimal route, which looks at the CO2 and the contrails. But we don't consider that the forecasts are yet reliable enough that 8 hours after you've put this together, the forecasts are still going to be the same. So we're introducing a tactical element into the long haul as well. So although they'll put their best efforts in the flight plan, in the same way as for short haul aircraft, we will, in addition, have airline-led tactical changes that might come about. So if the situation looks like it might be different, and actually the ISSR, so the ice supersaturated region where the persistent warming contrail may form, seems to have changed, and the forecast is giving them different information as the flight's in actual execution, then they can request from air traffic control a change to their flight level or potentially some lateral deviation. We think most of the changes are going to be vertical, but there is also potential for lateral as well. So in this case, we will endeavour to make that change. So in our current operations, we can be requested change by the pilots due to weather avoidance, for example, or if there's turbulence, and we'll do what we can to make that happen. So it will follow the same procedures as that, really. We will look to facilitate that requested change. Now, the third sub-solution that we're looking at, it's being led by Eurocontrol MUAC, so Maastricht Upper Area Control Centre, who've already done some testing on contrails and conducted some trials in 2021. They're looking to do further trials, and they are looking to do an ANSP-led solution to the problem. So again, it still involves everybody collaborates together. It involves the airlines, who would still ideally file their flight plan to avoid where they think the contrails will be. But in this case, the ANSP will take the lead on routing aircraft around where the contrail is expected to form. So that's our kind of what we've developed conceptually. And this is the sort of thing we want to run validations on so that we can understand what it actually looks like.
So 3 approaches to this. I think it is a very good start to break down generally how this problem can be tackled from an operational point of view. What are we avoiding here actually? I mean, there could be ways to predict this by using COSIP, which is the DLR model for predicting persistent contrails and their evolution or lifetime. But then there is also ACCFs that take into account all non-CO2 effects. Within your project, is there any preference, or how do you compare those 2 approaches?
So we don't have a preference at the moment, because actually how we tend to work in SESAR overall is that we're not about validating any particular tool. We're about taking forward a concept which is tool agnostic and can be used going forwards. Having said that, I think maybe the world of contrail mitigation is slightly different in that way, and there are a limited number of how we can use this. So a lot of it, what we're doing at the moment, is COSIP based. But we have got different ways of taking in that data and understanding it. And like I said, the airlines, we have a number of airlines involved in the work we do, and they are using some different flight planning providers as well, which I think is really useful. So we're getting a slightly different picture, and we're not limited to one particular tool or putting forward one particular tool for use.
You mentioned 2 general approaches to this, and one is the airline-led and the other one is the controller or ANSP-led approach. And I'm wondering, for the second kind of approach, I remember this DLR study also in the MUAC area where whole airspaces were closed down for everyone, basically. Now, I'm wondering, for the ANSP-led approach, is it also possible to have a more granular kind of approach, that it is ANSP-led, but it's not closing down an entire airspace?
Yeah, absolutely. I think closing down an entire airspace is probably quite unrealistic going forwards. So part of what we're doing, we're not just running actual flight trials, we're also running some simulations. So one of our simulations will be run by Eurocontrol using their RNES tool, which can simulate the entire ECAC area at a network level, running flights through that. And basically we can go in there and change the parameters. So we could look at something very extreme and what we don't really expect to put in operationally, where we close a whole big chunk of airspace. But then we can also look at something more nuanced, which is probably the way forwards. So I think, again, one of the things we want to look at within the project is to show that what's operationally feasible at the moment. And we don't want to crack a nut with a sledgehammer here. We don't want to say you can't fly through multiple flight levels of vast swathes of European airspace, because that's not very realistic and we don't see that being very acceptable. But what we do think is, well, we can start doing something right now. So what can we do at the moment? Well, perhaps we can start acting in the core night hours when there's not too much traffic, when it's easier to move traffic out of a particular flight level because there isn't as much else in the way. Now, this won't solve all of the warming contrails, but it will solve some of them. And that seems like a good place to start. And again, so this isn't so much the ANSP-led option, but if we move over to the oceanic area, that's an area where we really feel we can start to make a difference quite early on because of the nature of the operation, as well as the fact that the actual oceanic area has some very warming contrails and it's a significant kind of hotspot for warming contrails. So there's a lot of potential there. It's very different type of airspace from the continental European airspace where everybody's kind of crisscrossing, climbing, descending. But over the ocean, it's very unidirectional and it's a lot easier to potentially make those mitigation actions. So we think we can do that there a little bit sooner potentially, and it will be feasible to actually put something in place without having too much of an impact on the overall traffic. Then as we get a better picture and as the research continues, because we're not going to stop when we've got a first version of the solution, then we can hone that in and try and bring more benefits. But for now, we're not looking to mitigate against 100% of the warming contrails, but we are aiming to do what we can in terms of big hitters. So that might be avoiding some of them, or in terms of when it's easier to manage.
In any case, you need to motivate people to act. And especially, everyone has a different agenda or KPIs to optimize their work for. And it could be ANSP-led, it could be airline-led. What are your approaches to motivate the actors to take action against these warming or persistent contrails? Or in other words, how do you incentivize the actors?
Yeah, so I think that's a completely key question there, is the incentivization. So as an ANSP, we're not the ones providing the incentivization itself. We are facilitating what the airlines would like to fly. There is a case at the moment for an airline may choose to avoid warming contrails because it's sustainable, because it's the right thing to do, because it will give them good kind of green credentials, if you like. So there's that option. But I don't really realistically think that's enough for the industry. And this is where regulations will come in. So the regulations will be quite relevant to how this looks, depending on how strong the regulations or incentives are in the areas of non-CO2 will have an impact on how much the airlines want to take that action. So from the NATS point of view, we want to be ready to facilitate those contrail mitigating flights when the airlines are looking to make them, which I expect may well be happening in the next few years, because we have the monitoring, reporting and verification coming in place across Europe. So measuring is starting from 2025 with a view to actually putting some sort of regulation in potentially by 2028, as I understand it.
And by mid-2026, the project will be going on, the CICONIA project. Where do we stand today? In terms of avoiding warming persistent contrails, how would you describe the current state of technology? Can we do it already today?
I think on a very small scale today, we can do something. I think we can definitely do operational trials, and that's going to be really important to pave the way for when we take it forward into operations, which I believe we should be doing as soon as we possibly can. So I'm really pleased that we've got this project that we're working on, that so many people are coming together, and it's not the only non-CO2 project, there are others as well. I think one of the important things that we have to realize is a lot of our kind of efficiency targets towards reaching net zero by 2050, and that's usually net zero carbon emissions. A lot of the benefits that we're going to see are not going to be coming in for the next 10 or 15 years. So benefits from future technologies and sustainable aviation fuel at scale, they won't be happening till the mid 2030s or 2040s. So what we have to ask ourselves, what can we do now? Because we are in a situation where the climate is changing and changing very rapidly. We're potentially approaching a lot of tipping points. And I personally believe every industry needs to do what they can. What can we do? We can do operational efficiencies today. So while we're preparing all the way for these future technologies, and we need to keep doing that, absolutely, we can introduce operational efficiencies and we can introduce action on non-CO2 because that has an immediate effect. And that's a really important thing to bear in mind. So yes, we want to take action as soon as possible. We still want to minimize the CO2. That doesn't stop being important at all. But in terms of contrail mitigation, we have got some providers out there who are able to do some work towards this. And as I said, we're ready for trials. And then we can really, if we throw a lot at this, which we're trying to do here, we can take forwards at some level or another following on in the coming years. Now, in terms of maturity of the concept we're working on in SESAR, we're not really considering that we're ready to bring this into industrialization at the end of the project. We probably need another project to further mature it. What we're looking to do is to bring the project to technical readiness level 4. So that means that we have an understanding of what the concept looks like. We're able to measure some of the performance benefits, but it's not quite ready for the pre-industrialization yet, and it will need more work in that area. So we're hoping there'll probably be a follow-on project in the next program of SESAR, so a CICONIA 2 perhaps.
This is the great thing about SESAR, that you have this innovation pipeline and you're trying to move up the TRL ladder. And a question that I'm now faced with is, we had Satavia on a couple of episodes ago, and their solution seems very similar to the first approach that you described. So the airline-led short haul kind of thing, because it's supposed to be done in a pre-tactical manner. So I'm wondering, since this is, a exploratory research funded by SESAR, how do these two approaches, compare against each other in terms of technological readiness level?
So my understanding of Satavia, and I think they've done some really important work in bringing this to the fore and actually demonstrating something that can be done. So my understanding is that they run their predictions based on COSIP, but they also have something which improves that forecast, and I don't have visibility of what that is. So that's perhaps a bit of a difference between a company like Satavia and the sort of work we do in SESAR, where we would have visibility and kind of proof, if you like, of what we're doing to take that forwards. So I think at the moment that's the difference. We can't see that element of it. And one of the areas that we all need to work on a little bit more perhaps is verification as well. So in the SESAR project in CICONIA, we want to run some verification of whether the contrails that we're predicting are being formed or not. And to do this, we're looking to have some satellite information, we're looking to have some ground camera information, we're looking to have some observations, as well as kind of reanalysis of the contrail predictions after the event. So we're looking to bring all those things together. And I think that's still an area where there's further work to do is on the verification.
Do you think that currently in the debate of contrail management, the ANSP perspective is represented sufficiently, and the potential challenges that lie ahead with regards to scaling solutions from trials to large-scale applications or whole fleet applications?
That's a really good question. I think, are we represented yet? Well, we probably are in the research projects, but that hasn't happened or been completed yet, I should say. So in CICONIA, it's a big part of what we're doing is to try and understand the ANSP perspective. So we've got airlines running trials on their particular flights, and that's all very interesting and it can show us what can happen, but it doesn't show us that big picture on its own of how that scales up. So what we're doing to address this is, so first of all, coming from the desktop exercises that are being run currently by our airlines, we're going to put the information in front of our controllers and have kind of expert workshops where they will say, well, what would this look like if everybody wanted to do it? So that's a first step. We've also got a number of our partners running simulations to look at what it looks like at the network level. So we've got the Eurocontrol simulation looking at what the network as a whole will look like with various parameters put in that I talked about briefly before. We've also got some simulations looking at DCB optimization, so demand and capacity balancing optimization. So how that looks when we might want to move more aircraft from a particular piece of sky to a different one, and the ATM feasibility. So we're looking to take some of the information from the flight trials and upscale it to what would that look like at a complete network level for the entire fleet, putting that into practice. So we haven't got all those answers yet, but we have got validations that are being set up that will hopefully give us some of those answers.
I could ask you so many more questions, but given the time constraint that we have, I will now pass on a question from our previous podcast guest, and that was Haldane Dodd from ATAC. And he had a very particular question around the introduction of, new technologies. And his question was, from an ANSP perspective, how can we make sure that we take full advantage of satellite-based navigation, particularly in the developing world, and what needs to be done to promote more use of satellite-based ADS-B and really try to push the use of airspace as efficiently as possible?
Oh, that's a fascinating question. So actually, we've done a lot of work in recent years on ADS-B technology and usage in NATS over the ocean. So prior to 2019, we didn't have this, and it was brought in. So ADS-B technology was brought in over our oceanic operation in 2019. And what this has meant was that separations, which used to be around about 40 nautical miles between aircraft, can now be reduced to 14 nautical miles. So this means much greater efficiencies. It's been a real bonus for that part of the airspace, and it means that more traffic is likely to get the actual trajectory or closer to the optimum trajectory that they want to fly. So in terms of other areas, what can be encouraged to bring this in? Well, I think, if we're kind of considering areas that don't have radar coverage at the moment, then this is potentially up and coming areas for aviation development. So it's a really good question. And as I say, we can see the advantages over the oceanic operation. So to kind of share that information is probably quite pertinent in the first instance to encourage. We can see the benefits from this. So in terms of actually implementing the technology, again, that's probably not something that I can give a very good answer to. It's not something I'm aware of, the channels of how that would happen between different ANSPs. But one thing we do as an ANSP is we do reach out to others as well and kind of share information, and potentially, we work with other NSPs to share what we've got already. So there could be a market for that, I guess.
I love the answer. And you also have the chance to pass on a question. And our next week's guest is Michelle Bishop. What would be your question to her?
So I met Michelle last November at the Council Eurocontrol Sustainable Skies Conference, which focused on contrails. She was the co-chair. And there was so much positive energy about making progress in the area coming at that conference, which was really fantastic. So my question to Michelle would be, does she think that industry action on mitigating warming contrails could be operationally widespread in the next 5 years?
Oh, I was going to ask that question anyway. So thanks for underlining this one. Now I feel very confident when I raise it. And other than that, Sian, thanks so much for taking the time. This was very pleasant, and I really love to see this progress and the big ambitions behind CICONIA. There will probably be a time when we can discuss the results, or maybe interim results. I will reach out again. Is there anything you'd like to share with the audience? Anything I should link in the show notes?
Yeah, as you mentioned, this is the talk that I gave at Sustainable Skies Conference together with Brice when we talked about the concept and some of the validations. I also briefly mentioned the Eurocontrol work on reducing low-level stack holding and airborne delay and taking ground delay. There are a couple of papers I can send you the link to, which I think are quite interesting work that you could also share as well.
Right, I'll do that, and it's highly recommended, this presentation, and it should serve as a good extension to this podcast, because I tried not to ask identical questions to at least have some kind of complement content here. Well, Sian, thanks again.
Thank you for having me.
Speak soon.
Bye.